Hello everybody, welcome to Aude and Tulava, where we're walking our way through the Lord of the Rings a chapter at a time. Today we're talking about Chapter 5, Conspiracy Unmasked. We'll pick up with the hobbits Merry recently added to the group, just having parted with Farmer Maggot. They ride to the ferry and get on and head towards Brandy Hall. We get a short aside about the history of Brandy Hall, which kind of makes me think Bilbo wrote this particular section as he was one of the most interested in history. As the hobbits reach the other side, Sam sees a figure seemingly crouched, searching the ground where they stepped onto the ferry and slink back into the gloom. Merry notices as well, and Frodo insists they all get inside before talking about such scary topics as, bundles on the ground. Merry rides on ahead to get a second supper ready for them. As they arrive, Frodo is amazed as the other hobbits organized the house as closely as they could to be just like Bag End. Of course, you can really, feel the disappointment from Frodo that he doesn't truly get to stay there and retire in his little house out of the way in Buckland. But in true merriness, Merry thought of everything, and before they even get down to eating, they have 3 full tubs of hot water for the 3 travelers to take a bath. Of course, we get another song here in classic Hobbit fashion, and of course, we'll talk about that after we get through this quick recap. Supper time, and then time for the travelers to tell Merry about the figure on the other side of the bank. Frodo admits the Black Riders are most likely connected with old Bilbo's adventures, and finally tells the other hobbits that he has something important to tell them, and he doesn't really know how. Merry pipes up and spills the whole conspiracy story. They've been nervous about Frodo leaving for quite a while. Sam has been spying forever, but stopped once he was infenestrated by Gandalf. They know about the ring, at least the fact that it exists and makes you invisible, because Merry saw Bilbo disappear and then reappear when the Sackville Bagginsons came calling. Merry even admits to seeing the Red Book of Westmarch that Bilbo had worked on. Of course, this whole conspiracy started because they kept hearing Frodo mutter things like, "I wonder if I will ever see this valley again," while they were out walking. Not exactly subtle on Frodo's part. They admit they are afraid but are going with Frodo. Of course, Frodo can only be happy that he just has such good friends who are willing to come with him, even if they don't know what they're getting into. After cheers of Captain Frodo and the company, they dance around and sing a song that was modeled, not exactly ironically, after the Dwarven song that sent Bilbo on his way many years ago. While Frodo laments the speed at which they need to leave, he still wants to connect with Gandalf, remember. The other hobbits calm his mind by saying their other friend Fatty will be staying at Crickhollow, dressing as Frodo, and will be able to send Gandalf along the way after them. They decide to go through the old forest to keep out of sight and leave really early, hoping no one would be able to accidentally let any information slip to the Black Riders following them. They go to sleep and Frodo dreams. We'll talk about the dream. But first, poems, songs. Fun one first and then a somber one next. This is the song they sing while in the bath. Very much hobbitish song. Sing hey for the bath at the close of day that washes the weary mud away. A loon is he that will not sing. Oh, water hot is a noble thing. Oh, sweet is the sound of the falling rain and the brook that leaps from hill to plain. But better than rain or rippling streams is water hot that smokes and steams. Oh, water cold we may pour at need down a thirsty throat and be glad indeed. But better is beer if drink we lack and water hot poured down the back. Oh, water is fair that leaps on high in a fountain white beneath the sky. But never did fountain sound so sweet as splashing hot water with my feet. Just sound like a Pippin line. Again, Hobbit meter, iambic tetrameter. And again, for a much more in-depth view of this poem, I will refer you to Corey Olson in episode 19 of Exploring Lord of the Rings. I'll link it below with a timestamp so you won't have to go search for it. I did the searching for you. One thing I'm sure you've noticed is the way Peter Jackson put just a small part of this song / poem into his films. It's that first line from the second stanza, first 2 lines, I guess. Merry and Pippin singing at the Green Dragon. Always nice to remember them using things like this in the movies, rather than what they did to my boy Faramir. R.I.P. This is a simple song of Hobbit comfort. The 2 middle stanzas take the first 2 or 3 lines and talk about the things that are nice. Falling rain, a brook, leaps from hill to plain, cold water to drink, rain, a rippling stream. Then the next line or lines talk about what's better than those really, really great things. Hot, steamy water, beer, and hot water again. The first stanza sets the whole thing up by telling us we'll be singing about a bath at the end of the day. And the fourth stanza is really just a rhapsodic wax about said hot water. It's really just a quintessential Hobbit song. While they love traveling and, adventuring, they're quite focused on coming back and having their comfort at the end of the day. Knowing what we know, it really makes you think about how long they'll be without these things. Assuming you've read the book, otherwise spoilers, I guess. But also how their attitudes basically stay the same, at least for Merry and Pippin. Now, the next poem. Farewell we call to hearth and hall, though wind may blow and rain may fall. We must away ere break of day, far over wood and mountain tall. To Rivendell, where elves yet dwell, in glades beneath the misty fell, through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell. With foes ahead, behind us dread, beneath the sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past, our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we ride before the break of day. So if you couldn't tell, it's iambic tetrameter again. And this one was talked about in episode 21 of Exploring Lord of the Rings, link below. And I have to admit, I find this song to be kind of hilariously naive, especially after the bathing song. I will give them this. They admit they don't know when they're going to get to Rivendell. So that's good, I guess. They admit they're going to be sleeping under the stars until their quest is complete, which is, at least that's pretty accurate. The third stanza, however, really strikes me, especially after the last two chapters. Foes ahead, behind us dread. I mean, obviously they need to stay in rhythm and get a rhyme for the next line, but they're going to be pursued from behind by foes, and Frodo especially will step by step be walking directly into dread. It's just an oddly optimistic line for me. If you have another take on this, let me know down in the comments. Really love to hear your views on this too. Although talking about dread behind probably seems really apt to them at the moment, at the beginning of the chapter, we get a description of the ferry and the road to the ferry. They turned down the ferry lane, which was straight and well kept and edged with large whitewashed stones. In 100 yards or so, it brought them to the riverbank, where there was a broad wooden landing stage. A large flat ferry boat was moored beside it. The white bollards near the water's edge glimmered in the light of two lamps on high posts. Behind them, the mists in the flat fields were now above the hedges, but the water before them was dark, with only a few curling wisps like steam among the reeds by the bank. There seemed to be less fog on the further side. Now, this is kind of a lovely, idyllic sounding place. A well-kept lane lined with white stones, wisps of steam above the dark river. And then we get the last line. There seemed to be less fog on the further side. Not that there was less, just that there seemed to be less fog. Here, I think, is something J.K. Rowling totally stole from the professor. There was always fog around when the Dementors were dementing, whatever they do. And no, I don't think this is some cheap, the grass is greener sort of thing. Remember, just a few minutes later, when they reach the other side of the river, they see what we assume is a black rider crouching by where they left the dock. And knowing Tolkien, he chose his words very carefully. If we look back at the previous chapters, the gaffer got the chills when talking to a black rider. And when the three hobbits hear the cry of the black riders, they sat and stood as if suddenly frozen. It was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood. So it stands to reason that the hobbits feel like there is a fog around them. If we remember forward to Pippin's time in Minas Tirith, we hear Gandalf remark about the general leading Sauron's forces. Yet now, under the Lord of Barad-dûr, the most fell of all his captains is already master of your outer walls, said Gandalf. King of Angmar long ago, sorcerer, ringwraith, lord of the Nazgul, a spear of terror in the hand of Sauron, shadow of despair. A spear of terror. It's just, wow, so evocative. Now, we know from the hunt for the ring in Unfinished Tales, the Witch King was not one of the riders the hobbits encountered, at least in these last couple chapters, but it's probably reasonable to assume the other 8 have similar effects on people. They all seem to affect people in a similar way. Just, the Witch King is, more witchier. We also find out later that the Black Riders hate water. And if you're a fan of the Dresden Files like me, you'll be of similar mind. It's perfectly reasonable, if you cross these two together, to assume that magic, or, magia, as Tolkien uses the term in his letters, is hindered by water and dissipates all the more quickly if, it has to travel over water. So I like to think that not only do the Black Riders Magia, or more likely Goetia, I think is how you say it, we'll call it bad magic for now, have a limit to the effective distance. It's more quickly dissipated by the Brandywine River. So the seemingly foggy air goes away and the Hobbit's spirits are lifted and their minds are freed. As we can see, there is no mention of looking through the fog at the bundle swaying, on the other side, just that it fades into the gloom of the darkness outside the lights of the lamp, not into the fog. Now, I have to admit, I never fully fleshed that out until I was sitting down writing this script. I'm just so proud. But if you would like me to do a video kind of comparing Magia and Goetia, let me know in the comments below. It'd take probably some research, as I only know a little bit about it, but it could be fun. Before we get to Frodo's dream, what kind of video would this be without talking a little bit about hobbitry? We first see it when getting ready for the bath. Which order shall we go in, said Frodo, eldest first or quickest first? You'll be last either way, Master Peregrine. Obviously, Frodo is making fun of Pippin, but even calling him by his full name, Master Peregrine, is just a little poke by Frodo. And right after the poem, we hear Merry have a little go at Pippin again. Locks, said Merry, looking in. The stone floor was swimming. You ought to mop all that up before you get anything to eat, Peregrine, he said. Hurry up or we shan't wait for you. I doubt he would prove true to his threat, but I love the threat either way. Now, you may not think that hobbitry is super important. Just, a bunch of guys getting together, making fun of each other. But not only do I think this really speaks to why hobbits, these four specifically as well, are so resilient to the ring and all the trials that they're going to be facing, but it affects most other people in the company as they leave Rivendell too. And even before, we'll see Aragorn, Elrond, Gandalf all participate in hobbitry through the story. Even Gimli and Legolas's little competition at Helm's Deep is hobbitry adjacent, I guess we could say. It's something that kind of permeates the whole company. And as we already talked about, Tolkien considers himself a hobbit. He's someone that lived through the Battle of the Somme, his mother dying at age 11, his children going off to war. Not to mention having all those kids on what could really only be considered a meager salary. In the hobbitry, we get to see a glimpse of Tullars himself, the man who dressed up as a Norse barbarian and went door to door, and the joy and laughter that affects many of the people it comes to contact with. Joy in difficult times. And not to get too theological, but I think that's something Tolkien really truly believed in. And lastly, we'll talk about Frodo's dream. Copyright claims be darned. Here's the whole thing. Eventually, he fell into a vague dream in which he seemed to be looking out of a high window over a dark sea of tangled trees. Down below among the roots, there was the sound of creatures crawling and snuffling. He felt sure they would smell him out sooner or later. Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first, he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea far off, a sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly, he found he was out in the open. There were no trees, after all. He was on a dark heath, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall, white tower standing alone on a high ridge. Great desire came over him to climb the tower and see the sea. He started to struggle up the ridge towards the tower, but suddenly a light came in the sky, and there was a noise of thunder. Now, for over an hour-long discussion on just the dream, again, refer you to Exploring Lord of the Rings, episode 22, again, linked below. I'm not going to reference that video for my discussion here, so they may be completely different. I'm just kind of going to shoot from the hip. But Corey and the audience, as usual, they make great observations, if I recall correctly. Of course, at the beginning of the dream, Frodo seems to just have a plain old dream worrying about the things that happened to him recently. The snuffling, crawling creatures seem, pretty clearly to be the Black Riders. I tend to see the rest of the dream as, I guess you would say, a little bit prophetic. Maybe Eru giving Frodo some insight into his future to calm him or give him peace. He hears the sea, sees a white tower. Now, this is really cool. The ebook version on Kindle on Lord of the Rings has a hyperlink on the words White Tower. It takes me to a footnote in Appendix A, Annals of the Kings and Rulers. The tower referenced in this footnote speaks of Emin Biraid on the Tower Hills east of the Grey Havens. Elendil placed a palantir there so he could look back with straight sight and see Erisea in the Vanished West. We don't have time to talk about the fall of Numenor here, but suffice it to say, this is a beautifully sad reference. Sam even references the elves leaving from the harbors beyond the White Towers. I know I've been giving, spoilers a little bit here or there, but without going crazy, Dream Frodo is trying to see where he's going in his future. Throughout the book, we see that healing is found with the elves, or with the old ways that come from the elves and those powers, which, again, taught by the elves. As we know, the elves are leaving and sailing into the west. This tower and the view it provides could give Frodo some hope, and maybe even some healing, kind of at least just to start. Again, check out Corey's chat about the dream for a much longer take, but as I'm thinking through this now, trying to really dig into my thoughts about it and not just, parrot somebody else's, even if they are Corey's, it's really quite sobering. A beautiful elven-built tower by the sea, facing lands no longer there and facing powers that can provide healing, that helped set the stars in motion, remembering Gildor's, folk's song. It's really beautiful until a sudden light in the sky and thunder wakes Frodo up, which this is kind of called back to reality. Basically, his alarm clock goes off right at the best, part of the dream. Just rude. And with that, we reached the end of chapter 5. Honestly, thank you so much. Appreciate you watching. If you are enjoying this little walkthrough that we're doing, please like, subscribe. I would really love to hear from you and what you think about the dream and the Black Riders' use of Magia or Goetia. But until next time, out in Tulava, day shall come again.